This is because the U.S. capitalist class is so unconstrained, but the only force in United States that can hold them in check is the military-industrial complex, is the national security crowd. You actually had Gina Raimondo recently explaining her rationale for expanding this tech sanction on China. Like people are asking, like the U.S. tech companies are hurting. Nvidia is prevented from selling to one of their largest natural market on AI chips. And Gina Raimondo basically says, sorry, U.S. business just have to suck it up for national security because democracy. The democracy she's talking about, of course, is about the great choice between Biden and Trump, in 2024. But that's what really. But the only thing that basically that could hold the rest of the U.S. capitalist class in check is the Pentagon, the military intelligence industrial complex. Again, that's just kind of shell games. It's just shifting the resources from one sector of the economy to all the weapon manufacturers, but because that's the only thing that's produced in U.S. nowadays. Weapons and OnlyFans. That's the support of the U.S. GDP, and
well, Carl, don't forget Netflix. Come on, Netflix.
I'm sorry.
We have to have season 8. We have to have season 8 of The Floor is Lava or whatever. One, I swear, final quick note. Carl mentioned Gina Raimondo's comments. This is the U.S. Commerce Secretary. She also said in those comments, she said that China is the greatest threat the U.S. has ever seen. She said that. And of course, she said that the U.S. wants to prevent China from innovating technologically. So much for the free market, right? They don't actually want competition. That's the goal, is to prevent China from competing with U.S. big tech monopolies.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And I just wanted to, Carl, when you were talking about the kind of hierarchy of the cannibalism of the empire, and in many ways, kind of pushing EU accession for Ukraine in this period where obviously things are quite stark and going quite badly for Ukraine and for the overall Ukraine project. It is a huge contrast to the terms and conditions and everything that the United States has put in front of Ukraine for NATO for obvious reasons. But it's all about Ukraine. It's got to get rid of that corruption. It's not time yet. But the European Union, I think what the United States is really saying here is not only are they trying to wash their hands of Ukraine, but they are more than happy to continue this process of weakening and devaluing the European Union, really cementing its role as kind of the cleanup crew of the empire when it itself is looking more and more like the carcass that you were talking about, Carl.
Well, that's a plan all along. I mean, I remember in early 2000, I was actually working in Hamburg, Germany. At that time, when EU was just coming into form, and then there was actual fear in the U.S. talking circles about how this could possibly present as a counterweight to United States and possibly a path lead down to European independence from the U.S. foreign policy goals. So what U.S. has done in the past 30, 20 years is that they have infiltrated all the Europe through sponsoring all these Atlanticist institutions, which produce creatures like von der Leyen or like Baerbock. I mean, these are all creatures from these Atlantis institutions, and they infiltrated all levels of EU and European government. So now all they have is yes men and yes women to Washington in all levels of European government. And frankly, I don't know how European voters put up with this shit, man. That I mean, this is it's unfortunate because right now that this is also behind the shift to the right-wing politics in Europe, because these people, they don't have they are trying to seek alternatives to the current the neoliberal elite that's ruling over them. Instead, they're getting swindled by all these just racist populist rising tide of outright in Europe. It's also happening in the United States, by the way. I mean, like, this is why we end up with choice with Biden or Trump, even though majority of Americans knew there's something deeply wrong with this country, right? But I think that this also speaks to a lack of a real opposition in all these developed countries. But so now we have all these. The imperial project is kind of sitting adrift. We're headed by this senile old man who doesn't know what he's talking about half the time, and there's really no grand vision for the U.S. empire other than let's keep U.S. number one. That's the only vision. Whereas China, they're actually coming up with the slogan, the community, the shared future for the mankind, which is a grand vision, and they are talking about building a pan-Asian rail links that will have high-speed rail running from Shanghai to Singapore. Now that is a grand vision. That is a vision for the future, vision for development that people can get excited and look forward to. And the U.S. the only thing they can offer is war. More war, more weapons.
Carl, and season 8 of The Floor is Lava. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You have to give them some credit for that. I just want to briefly, if I can share my screen for a second as well. I want to briefly show an incredible article that was published by the European Council on Foreign Relations. This is a mainstream think tank in Brussels that is funded by all of the major EU states. This is like the US Council on Foreign Relations. It's obviously based on it. This represents the elite of Europe. And they published an article this April titled "The Art of Vassalization: How Russia's War in Ukraine Has Transformed Transatlantic Relations." Now, they of course blame Russia for this, but regardless of that propaganda of blaming Russia for everything, they acknowledge that Europe is becoming an American vassal. That's the quote. Europe is becoming an American vassal. They acknowledge that this war in Ukraine has revealed Europeans' profound dependence on the U.S. for their security, despite EU efforts at so-called strategic autonomy, which has never happened. The EU has grown less powerful than the United States economically, technologically, militarily. So this is a clear acknowledgement that the U.S. is kind of like colonizing Europe by European elites.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely puts the period on it, Ben. So perhaps we can quickly now get to Gaza, because we have to talk about the situation in Gaza. I guess to begin with regard to Gaza, of course, there's been now over 2 months of just Israeli onslaught, a genocidal nightmare for Palestinians, massive displacement, more than a few million people displaced, now upwards of 20,000 people killed, and the number of children nearing 10,000, women very close to that. So that's gotten a lot of coverage. But lately, especially in recent days, the United States has attempted to shift its position because of the pressure, enormous pressure on the United States, which claims it supports a two-state solution. And of course, everything that Israel is doing is literally to eliminate any such possibility. But here I just want to play a quick exchange between Mr. Jake Sullivan and Mr. Yoav Gallant, the defense minister who called Palestinians human animals at the beginning of the conflict. Here he is talking to Jake Sullivan, and it appears he's giving him a warm welcome. I can't wait for the talks, but let's hear what he has to say, because there's some details here that I think contradict the United States' hope that this will get wrapped up by the new year.
So thank you for being side by side with us in this effort. The Hamas is a terror organization that built itself for a decade to fight Israel, and they build infrastructure under the ground and on the ground, and it is not easy to destroy them. It will take and require a long period of time. It will last more than several months, but we will win and we will destroy them.
So it'll last several months. So several months is, of course, well past the new year. And as many have observed, it's hard when it comes to Israel, when it comes to the whole dog and tail metaphor. Who's the dog wagging the tail? Who's at the tail being wagged? Sometimes it's hard to know whether it's Israel or the United States in terms of the optics. But I'm curious on your reaction. Maybe we can begin with you, Ben.
Well, I'm firmly in the camp. It's the U.S. that's in charge. But of course, Israel is an extension of the U.S. empire. It began as a British colonial project, going back to the Balfour Declaration. When Palestine was part of the British Empire, it was called the British Mandate for Palestine. With the Balfour Declaration, the British Empire gave its green light to the Zionist settler colonial project. And then when Israel was created, there was this period where it had support of numerous Western powers, especially the UK and France, leading to the Suez Crisis in the 1950s, when Egypt's leftist leader Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, and that led to an Israeli war backed by the UK and France. And then since the 1960s, Israel has been a close U.S. ally. But the point that I always emphasize that we cannot forget is that it was really in the 70s and 80s when Israel became joined at the hip, an extension of Washington, which was the Iranian Revolution. We cannot understand the situation in the region without keeping that in mind. It was the overthrow of the puppet regime, the Shah in Iran, and the creation of a new independent nationalist government in Iran that frustrated U.S. imperial designs on the region. And of course, this is one of the most geostrategic regions of the world. Half of the world's top 10 oil and gas producers are in this region. And I always point out that if you go back to the Nixon administration, the discussion about Iran under the Shah was that Iran was the East pillar of Washington's so-called twin pillar strategy. Saudi Arabia was the West pillar, and Iran was the East pillar to maintain control over this region, to maintain control. And they lost that East pillar. And not only has Iran been independent, but Iran has supported resistance forces in the region against Israeli colonialism. So that has pressured the U.S. more and more and more to provide even more support for Israel to try to maintain its hegemonic control over this strategic region. In addition to the vast resources, there's also simply the geostrategic location. There are numerous geostrategic choke points in the region, including, I mentioned, the Suez Canal, where around 1/5 of the global's energy trade goes through every single day. And over 10%, around 12, 13% of global trade goes through the Suez. There's also the Bab al-Mandab Strait, right on the southwestern coast of Yemen, near Somalia as well, which is another geostrategic choke point, which is why a lot of the fighting in Yemen has been around that point. And also, if you go to the Persian Gulf region, I mean, in addition to, of course, exporting huge amounts of oil and now increasingly liquefied natural gas, Qatar being the world's largest producer, tied with the U.S., there are numerous strategic choke points as well in the Persian Gulf. And if there were a war and Iran decided to shut down the export of hydrocarbons by the Persian Gulf monarchies, Iran could do that. So Israel is, just as, imperialists in Washington will refer to Taiwan as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. I mean, Israel is even more of an unsinkable aircraft carrier connecting West Asia to the Mediterranean. And I also point again that we should keep in mind that Israel is basically run by North Americans. I mean, Netanyahu is a North American. Like, this is often forgotten. Netanyahu was raised in the United States. He went to high school and college in the United States. He spent his most formative years and started his career in the United States. He worked in Boston in finance with people like Mitt Romney. He's known Donald Trump for many years. They've been friends for decades. And when Netanyahu went back to Israel because his brother was killed, which is the only reason he really got involved in politics. In fact, Fox News published an article about Netanyahu, And they said that if his brother had not been killed, he probably would have just spent the rest of his life in the US. But he turned that, talk about cynicism. He leveraged the killing of his brother into a political career. And when he went back to Israel, he was then restationed in the US as a diplomat. So you talk about the tail of dog. It's the same thing. It's the same. I mean, like, it's not even tail of dog. It's the same body, right? Like, Israel is the 51st US state. It is an extension of the United States. And in the first generation of Israeli leaders were much more European, right? David Ben-Gurion and all of them. But really, for 50 years now, the Israeli leadership has been thoroughly Americanized. And now when we talk about, people will say, well, Biden made a comment and said that Israel has to minimize civilian casualties. Yeah, he says that publicly. And then in private, he's like, yeah, do what you need to do. We'll give you tens of billions of dollars. It doesn't matter what he says publicly. We all know that this is optics. The Israelis know that this is optics. If the U.S. actually tells Israel, yeah, we're not going to give you any more weapons and ammunition, then they'll have to stop the war. But until then, it's just all PR. It doesn't matter what Blinken says publicly. It matters what they're actually doing. Their actions are much more important than their rhetoric. And you can read that the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal in the past few weeks have had a series of articles about the U.S. sending tens of thousands of shells, of missiles, like billions of dollars of military equipment and ammunition being sent just since October. This is in addition to the $3.8 billion in unconditional military aid the U.S. gives to Israel every single year. And then, of course, we see the most recent UN votes. I mean, it's a joke almost. It's like we're living in a crazy, horrible movie, a nightmare that never ends. Every time there's a vote in the UN and the Security Council, the U.S. vetoes it. This has happened 3 times, 2 times in October, 1 time this December, in which the U.S. vetoed resolutions calling for a humanitarian ceasefire or even humanitarian pauses. The U.S. vetoes them. And then in the General Assembly, there have been 2 votes now, and the vast majority of the world votes for peace, and the U.S. and a small group of puppets vote against it. But again, they can't do anything because all the power is concentrated in the Security Council, which is controlled by the U.S. because of the veto. So this is what I was saying earlier. It's important to understand what the Western media is talking about to understand their discourse, but we should always look past the discourse because it's usually a distraction to have us focus on the trees and not see the forest, right? Missing the forest for the trees here is that the trees is Biden and Blinken make a few public comments criticizing Israel. The forest is that they continue doing everything they can militarily and diplomatically to protect Israel, to allow it to continue waging this war and to prevent any consequences for the blatant war crimes it's committing in broad daylight.
I largely agree, but I think about the particular point of Netanyahu. So the fact that he spent a lot of time in the United States, he actually doesn't have high opinions of Americans or American leadership. I have this clip to share from. This is a leaked audio from Netanyahu from 20 years ago, I think back in 2001. And this is when he talked about how he deceived United States to undermine the Oslo Accord, and he wanted to basically sabotage the whole 2-state solution.
לתת להם מכות, לא רק מכות כל כך מכירות, שהמחיר יהיה כבד ממצוא. כרגע המחיר לא כבד ממצוא. על התקפה רבת היקף ברשות הפלסטינית.
לא פוחדים, משחקים להם ירון על לתוך האישה הזה, וצחוק ופשוט הם לא פוחדים לסתובב.
זה מה שמביא אותנו
רגע, אבל אז השוק מהעולם יגיד מה אתם פוגשים? אתה לא מפחד מהעולם ביבי.
במיוחד היום עם אמריקה, אני יודע מה זה אמריקה. אמריקה זה דבר שאפשר להזיז אותו בקלות, להזיז לכיוון הנכון. לא יחליו.
אז אם אנחנו עושים את זה משהו, אז אם...
יש כאלה, אז נניח שהם אומרים משהו. 80% מהאמריקאים תומכים בנו. זה אבסורד. לא פחדתי להתאבד שם. לא פחדתי להתאבד עם קלינטון. לא פחדתי להתאבד עם חום. מה היו הסכמי אוסלו? הסכמי אוסלו שהכנסת חתמה עליהם. שאלו אותי, גם כבר תתקיים. כן, בתנאי כפוף להדדיות, צמצום הנסיבות. אבל איך מצמצם את הנסיבות? אני תן פירוש להסכם שיאפשר לי להפסיק את הדהירה הזאת לגבי 67. איך עשינו את זה? אף אחד לא אמר מה זה אתרים צבאיים מוגדרים. אתרים צבאיים מוגדרים, אני אמרתי אלה אזורי ביטחון. בקעת הירדן, מבחינתי זה אתר צבאי מוגדר.
נכון.
זה אוקיי. לך תגיד.
So here we have Netanyahu, basically saying the Americans are gullible. They will go along with whatever we do. In a way, it is because Israel is U.S.'s kind of outpost in the Middle East, because Biden was on record back when he was still coherent, back in 80s and 90s, when he can still make coherent sentences. He said, if it wasn't for a state of Israel, United States need to create an Israel to serve its interests in Middle East, right? And Netanyahu fully knows this. So he knows, like, ultimately, U.S. can't live without Israel. So he can get away with a lot of stuff, even if, it does not strictly match the U.S. interest at the moment. Because at the moment, I don't think U.S., for example, U.S. planned for this escalation in the Middle East, because Jake Sullivan was famously quoted on saying, the Middle East has been so calm, and we take credit for that, and then this blow up in his face, right? So right now, I actually do think that people in the White House do recognize how bad this looks for United States in front of the world opinion. So this is why they're making the gesture of sending Jake Sullivan to Israel to say, okay, you guys need to wrap this up, right? Because United States also strategic priorities also laid elsewhere. Jake Sullivan is the architect of the Ukraine war. He is the genius, the big brain behind using Ukraine war to get Europeans on U.S. side, and then to get the European corral together so they all can go on to anti-China. So that's the U.S. main obsession at this moment, is to contain China, contain Russia. So the Gaza thing is a big distraction for their plan. So this is, but basically the Israeli defense minister just told him to his face, no, we're going to do what we always do. But and he fully understand U.S. will continue to supply weapons, right? Because despite whatever Tony Blinken's noise made about our humanitarian concerns, Israel cannot carry out this genocide in Gaza without U.S. ammunition supply. Because, as I said, Israel is not a big industrial power. For prolonged war, it cannot produce its own military needs. It needs to import all the ammunition from United States. And this is another reason I argue that the Ukraine war is going to wrap up, because I'm sorry, the Israel's needs come before everybody else, even before average Americans. We got to give everything to Israel. And so at one hand, Israel knows that. But Netanyahu knows that U.S. will back them no matter what. So even he understands whatever he does is making U.S. take a big reputational damage in the world stage, but he doesn't care, because guess what? Like he said, 80% of Americans support us. Well, this was back in 2001. Okay, so you say the Americans will go along with us no matter what. They have that kind of. It's like it's hard to say who is a tail, who's a dog, because first of all, we know in U.S. there's all these evangelical Christians who are Christian Zionists, right? Their idea of supporting Israel is to fulfill the biblical prophecy. We get all the Jewish people in Israel, then we trigger the apocalypse, and they're all going to be gone, and then we have the second coming of the Christ, and everybody get raptured. And so we're basically just kind of using these Jews in Israel to fulfill our destiny, right? And the people like Netanyahu is like, oh yeah, these suckers, these Christian crazies, we're using them. We're using them to accomplish our aim, which is greater Israel. So they all think they're using each other, right? And this is it's a symbiotic relationship. It's a symbiotic relationship, but Israel clearly have the upper hand right now because Israel says how jump, all the U.S. congressmen say how high. You look at the Joker, the clown show. That's a Republican presidential debate, right? Like Nikki Haley's like, oh my God, Israel, go finish them. You
finish them. She said finish them 100 times.
Yeah. Yeah. She keep on saying finish them. She thinks she's running for the president of Israel, and you have Tom Cotton, who is questioning Biden nominee for like a judge, said, do you condemn Hamas? What do you think about Israel? It's like, look, what does this have to do? What does a U.S. judge have to do with freaking Gaza or Israel? Like, you are not a senator from Israel. You're a freaking senator from the United States. But this is the screwed up aspect of the U.S. electoral politics is all these U.S. politicians feels that somehow they cannot be seen as anti-Israel, right? That's why they passed a ridiculous a resolution that equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. So we're all anti-Semite now, guys. Congratulations. All of us are now anti-Semites, and then, including you, Ben Norton. and then you have Joe Biden speaking at the Hanukkah dinner. He said, well, you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. So by that logic, if you're anti-Biden, you are now an anti-Semite. Folks, you're being put on notice. You're all anti-Semites, and we're all right now. I can't even say the U.S. Congress has a best politician money can buy, because obviously that's an anti-Semitic statement. I mean, we live in the bizarre world, folks, but I don't think U.S. planned this. They didn't foresee this Gaza escalation. It is a distraction for their global ambitions, which is like John Mearsheimer said, the real big thing, we got to contain China. Everything is a distraction. We got to contain China because China is the biggest threat to the U.S. hegemony of the world, right? But right now they can't help themselves but sucker back in because of stupid U.S. electoral politics, and they have to go along with whatever Netanyahu is asking for, which is the unlimited U.S. support for his Greater Israel project. U.S. can make all the noise they want about support for a Palestinian state, and that nothing is coming out of that. We have the Oslo Accord that was sabotaged by Netanyahu, the Likud party, and then we have all these, like the October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. There was continued degradation and humiliation of Palestinian people on a daily basis, and Israel and United States was perfectly fine with that, because Jake Sullivan said Middle East hasn't been this calm. Like, hallelujah, we are doing God's work here, and then you blow up in their face. And so I think U.S. is actually scrambling at this point because it's forced into do something that you rather not do at this moment, which is to be seen as a big hypocrite and big bad imperialist in the eyes of the world. But the latest UN resolution to call for ceasefire, UN freaking resolution, the most toothless piece of thing put on paper, like that, no way Israel is going to respect. Yet United States cannot bring itself to even have the decency to abstain. They don't have to veto. They just need to abstain. But no, they have to veto it, right? They just have to take that bullet for the golden boy Israel, because Israel is a precious. It's a precious. You can't let go. And so I think this is actually very bad for the U.S. empire right now. The whole Gaza genocide that's happening in front of the whole world's eye. This is doing. This is how you get the Osama's letter to America. Now it became like a lightning read for the Zoomers when the stupid Guardian decided to take it off their website, and now all the Zoomers reading the letter to America is like, oh my God, Osama was correct. But so we're at the point where it's incredibly hard. It's harder and harder to hide the fact that emperor has no clothes, and it's not good for the U.S. empire. And I think the Biden, I think at least some people in the Biden administration realize that. That's why you have all these people who are quitting in protest, but the senior leadership, the top leadership, the boomers, the Biden people, their best days were in their peak years was in the 80s and 90s, right? It's a time when Biden says if it wasn't for Israel, we got to create an Israel for ourselves, and they haven't, the time have moved on, past them, but these people mindsets still stuck in the 1980s, 1990s. And this is why they keep on pursuing the only strategies they know how, which is stand by Israel no matter what, and compete with each other to see who is more pro Israel. But ultimately, I don't think that's sustainable. I think this is actually a very bad for the U.S. imperial project. It's a big distraction on their containment, their grand ambition to contain China and Russia. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, briefly, Danny, I just want to add a comment, highlight what Carl said. I agree with everything he said, and especially I want to highlight one point about why this attack was not expected. I don't agree with the people who say, this was like an Israeli inside job. Israel knew this was going to happen. I think that's giving too much credit to Israel, but also the Palestinian resistance. I think the reason that they chose this moment to attack is because they knew that it would frustrate the U.S. attempt to normalize Israeli colonialism with the other Arab states, especially with Saudi Arabia. Because, of course, the Trump administration with the so-called Abraham Accords, what they did is just formalize what we all knew, that Israel had relations with the UAE and with Bahrain. And that was just formalized. If Saudi Arabia has also for many decades had informal relations with Israel, including economic relations and including military technology. But through this attack and now through the Israeli genocide, I mean, it's not even just our opinion. Top UN experts published a statement you can find on the website of the High Commissioner, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UN Human Rights Office. Top UN experts published a statement saying that the Palestinian people are at risk of genocide, saying that very clearly, that Israeli officials are inciting genocide. But anyway, the point is, I mean, people who are watching this obviously agree with that. But just to emphasize that point, what I want to say is that the Biden administration kept boasting that it was so close to getting Saudi Arabia to also normalize relations with Israel. And of course, Jordan and Egypt have already normalized relations. So this now means that these countries, at least for several years, will not be able to normalize relations. Ideally, never, but at least for several years, because there would be widespread rebellion and protests and just so much backlash from the people of these countries. Because, of course, if you look at polls all across the region in West Asia, North Africa, the vast, 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 vast majority of the population supports Palestine. We're talking about nearly 100%, well over 90%. And we already see that countries that have normalized relations with Israel, their leaders support Israel, Egypt, Jordan, but they have to be very careful, which is why Egypt right now is being pressured by the U.S. to try to open the Rafah crossing to allow Israel to ethnically cleanse Gazans into the Sinai Peninsula, into the desert. That's Israel's stated strategy. There's a lot of evidence of this. One of the top Israeli ministers said very clearly the goal is a Gaza Nakba, referring to the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in 1948. They want a new Nakba, and they want to ethnically cleanse all of the 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza into the Sinai. But Egypt can't do that because I don't have any confidence in the Egyptian leadership, which of course it has largely been pro-Israel and pro-US, and they get a lot of funding. They rely on funding from the US, but they're constrained by their people. Because if Egypt were to do that, the government would probably fall in Egypt. There would be mass riots, protests. People would not tolerate that because they would see that their country is complicit in Israel's ethnic cleansing. So I think we should keep those two important factors in mind. that across the region, people support Palestine, and now the remaining states' attempt to normalize relations with Israel is dead. And even the UAE has at least temporarily suspended its relations with Israel.
I just to go off on what Ben Norton said, that's exactly right. To counter, when China brokered the Saudi-Iran détente, the peace deal, that actually sent a shockwave in Washington, and so Washington was trying to play catch up in the Middle East, but before that, Trump administration prided itself on brokering the Abraham Accord that brought UAE and Israel together, and Qatar, UAE and the Biden administration spent a lot of political.
Sorry, not Qatar though. Bahrain. I just want to. I mean, Qatar has its own many problems, but Qatar, they claim that they will never normalize relations with Israel, but
right, and they have the historic relationship with Hamas as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, and then Biden's administration spent a lot of political capital to trying to do like Abraham Accord number 2, which is bring Saudi Arabia to Israel together. This was also to offset the Saudi-Iran the peace deal that had happened, because the United States was afraid that it's losing leverage in the Middle East. Without this tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia, U.S. is kind of left out of the loop. One of the main role U.S. in Middle East supposedly is provide security, right? Because the Gulf states are afraid of Iran, so here we are, United States. We're here. We're your best defense against the bad Iran, right? And but now, so they're trying to get Saudi and Israel together to kind of counterbalance what they think the expanding Iranian influence. But that's all dead. That's all dead in the water, because as Ben Norton said, none of these states can afford to be seen making peace with Israel at this point. So it's actually really bad for Washington, Washington's plan for Middle East. But they have no choice. They have no choice but to go along with, and to add to that, the Israel's ethnic cleansing plan for Gaza. Washington was fully on board with that, because we had leaks showing that Washington officials are pressuring neighboring Arab states, we're talking about Egypt, Jordan, etc., to accept refugees from Gaza. So basically a repeating of 1948 Nakba, to force the Palestinian refugees who had been refugees for generations from 1948 when they got relocated to Gaza, and to become refugees again, but in other countries. And this was the Israel plan all along. And U.S. officials are fully going along with that, trying to offer incentive to Egypt, Jordan, and other Arab states to go along with this plan. Of course, there's a lot of resistance, like Ben Norton said, because that's basically acquiescence to Israel's ethnic cleansing and genocide. I mean, U.S. is scrambling right now. I mean, they clearly did not foresee this, and they're right now just scrambling to see how they can salvage whatever leverage they have left in Middle East. And it's that U.S. is not in the best shape, but yet they're kind of this archaic attachment to it. Well, not archaic, because Israel does serve as the U.S. outpost in Middle East. And because of that tie that binds, it cannot deviate from significantly from Israel's own policies. And so now we're in this situation where Biden administration is going down with the ship, because this is going to have an impact on his own election chance coming next year. There's no way he's going to get any Muslim vote next year. You have all these liberals say, "Oh my God, how can you let Trump win another election, he's going to get rid of all the Muslims and blah, blah, blah. But look, Biden is actively supporting a ongoing genocide. You know, many of the people like in Michigan, they have relatives in Palestine, they have cousins, uncles, and why would they vote for a man who are actively supporting that? And you know, it doesn't mean they want Trump. They just don't want Biden. They just don't want what currently is happening right now. They want that to stop. And Biden is going to lose all that swing votes from battleground states like Michigan. And so we're the Trump presidency 2024 is looking increasingly likely right now, folks.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe to close on this, I'll just say that I think you all hit on the confluence of factors that has led to this situation. On the one hand, you have this historic relationship that the United States has with Israel as the military outpost, as wholly necessary for the U.S. to maintain and impose its interests in the region, and its interests are that destructive, which explains why for so long, for many years, I mean, Palestine was just not on the agenda. What Israel was doing was going to be what Israel was doing. As long as it was steady as she goes, then there was going to be no qualms. But at the same time, the U.S.'s position as a whole has left it really vulnerable. And so the Biden administration seemed to, as you said, Carl and Ben, both of you hit on this point around normalization between Saudi Arabia, Israel, and these other Arab states. That, I believe, was Biden's attempt. I believe he really wanted, before his first term ended, as kind of signature foreign policy achievement, that he was able to, despite China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, despite all of that, he could get Israel closer to being recognized by those who have historically, at least rhetorically, refused to do so. So that left I believe Biden and the United States as a whole very vulnerable in the region. So when the resistance, when Hamas and the other Palestinian groups decided that it was time to launch an attack, Israel also understood that it had the ability to go as hard as it could and make a statement, because the United States was going to do very little to get in the way. It never really has, but it would have ample time to attempt to do what it wants to do, which is to, of course, totally ethnically cleanse the Palestinian territories so that it can achieve the final solution. So there's these huge confluence of interests, but I think the US's weak position and its inability to really steer anything. It wants to support Israel, but certainly Israel is doing everything it can to look the part of it actually has the authority. And as you play that video with Netanyahu, it's obviously been the case that senior leaders like him don't look very favorably or look at the United States really as like the kingpin of all of this. It truly is the same animal, to what you were saying in the beginning, Ben. It really is. It's just one animal. Maybe I want to refrain from dogs, because dogs can be actually quite great animals. It's the same beast. The tail, the body, the head, it's all one thing. So let's get to China. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Ben. You can.
No, you put it very well. I think that's a great note to end on. And I would just add one quick note at the end here. I mean, it's so horrific seeing the death toll. I mean, around 20,000 dead now, according to United Nations officials. At the very least, over half civilians is a conservative estimate. Probably around 70% women and children killed, and the death toll increasing by the day. But I think it's just important, although it is very important to talk about that and emphasize the horrific human suffering. At the same time, it's also important to keep in mind that every time this happens, every single day, the U.S. and Israel continue to dig themselves even deeper, destroy any semblance of international reputation they had, which, of course, we've been talking for over an hour now about how most countries in the world, the global majority, do not see the U.S. and Israel as like anything positive, as like certainly democratic or anything in this way. But it really has removed the illusion any pretense of support for democracy or human rights. And, now that the U.S. is blatantly stonewalling any attempt in the United Nations to bring about a ceasefire and openly sponsoring this genocide, we should never forget this in the future, because as there are more conflicts with China and Iran and any other country, Venezuela now, never, ever, ever forget this, because the U.S. is always going to try to appeal to human rights and democracy. And if there is this collective amnesia, I mean, like the attempts to erase all of these crimes, like the attempts to rehabilitate George Bush and the Iraq War. I mean, most people around the world that doesn't work on, but in the US, it's very important to never forget this historical moment, because of course there will be a very concerted attempt, however it ends, years from now, to try to just erase it and go back to pretending like the West is the upholder of the rules-based international order.
Yeah, and
I'm surprised you didn't ask me if I condemn Hamas, Danny. I just wanted to put the record out here. I'm pro-violence. When it comes to anti-colonial, anti-settler struggle, I am pro-violence, because Israel really thinks what they're doing right now, stripping men naked and parading them in front of cameras and then distributing them on international media. They really think these things will make them look good. They're gonna support their cause. I mean, I'm sorry, that's the best recruiting poster for Hamas or any Palestinian resistance group. I mean, I am fully pro-violence. I mean, the only way you're gonna get the settler colonial out of your land is do what the Vietnamese did. You take up weapons and you do a lot of violence. The Tet Offensive, that's what ended shattered any kind of illusions in United States that things were going well. That they're winning the war. A lot of these military analysts, all these open source intelligence bros, they're comparing the number of hardwares Israel is bringing into the field, whether the Israel's trophy system can block the RPG before they hit the tank. That's irrelevant. Okay, that's irrelevant. It's that's what the American commentators said about Tet Offensive back in the Vietnam War. They said, we scored a military victory. We destroyed the Viet Cong infrastructure. We told that they suffer a great price. But Vietnamese, they understood war is an extension of politics. They are fighting a specific political aim, which is to show Americans that war for them is unwinnable. And the Vietnamese were willing to pay the price to kick the colonizer out. And this is what the Palestinians going to do. And they're not going away. They're fighting for their own land. They're fighting for their right to exist. Right. And the Israeli action is just pouring the fuel on the fire. And right now, they're not gonna. I don't see how. I cannot see how their action can be sustainable over the long term. I mean, whatever Israel is doing in the recent everything Israel has done in the past 2 months is just furthering the cracks on the settler colonial institution that's called Israel. I mean, I have no doubt we might be able to see, a free Palestine from river to the sea in our lifetime.